so much for joining us today, Mr. Galarza. It is such an honor to have you here. Your career is so inspiring because you've accomplished so much at such a young age. As a council member and the mayor pro tem of the City of Coachella and working closely with the Riverside County Office of Education, you have had such an amazing career. So going straight in, over the past few years, you've had so many different roles and worn so many different hats, all of which have been in service to your community, specifically focusing on education. Why is education so important to the overall well-being of communities?
Yeah, education is the fundamental tool that we have in our country to empower communities and create thriving communities. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to study politics, and I knew I wanted to be involved in the community one way or another. And I entered in many different places. I was a labor studies minor, and so I had to do internships to complete that minor too. I entered in offices of state assembly members here locally and back home as well. Did the UC Center Sacramento, and worked on campus with the UCR Extension on a lot of international students, welcoming them, and some of the certificate programs that existed. And then I also interned at the County Office of Education, specifically in their Head Start unit, and for Head Start programs across the county. And Head Start, unlike other educational programs, is housed in a different department in the federal government, focusing more on the social and health being of people, and looking at as a poverty program, not specifically as an education program, but they do connect. And in my internship program, also working at the UCR Extension School, and then being a student here, I sort of decided that my focal point in politics or career, it will be education. And so that's sort of like, I mentioned these experiences because it took a lot of these different ideas and opportunities and experiences that I put myself into, and that opened up to understand, like, by focusing on education, then we empower communities and we empower individuals. We empower, create key points like empowering the individual, as I mentioned, ensuring that the individual has some self-love and knows their place in this community, processes, understands critical thinking. It also ensures that we have a cohesive and cultural aware community. And so communities understanding, all of us here, our last names are very different. And I came from a community where most people that I went to high school with that looked like me and talked like me, we were all Spanish speakers, and then learned English. And it took me to go to college and then take some ethnic studies courses and have classmates of different backgrounds to understand other cultures. But it'd be, how beautiful would it be where, now, great thanks to our former Assemblyman Medina, we're gonna have ethnic studies in California in a high school level. And now we're not gonna have to wait, or even for students that don't go to college, to understand of different cultures and different backgrounds. That's very important to our education and for thriving communities as we grow, and especially at a time where we have such divisive communities that don't understand this cultural and other people's backgrounds and needs, and why we're here today in this state and country that was built by immigrants for an immigrant community. And so another thing that's very important to me and dear is social economic mobility. Education creates that. I grew up in a mobile home park in Oasis, which is in Riverside County, and there, to this day, a lot of communities don't have access to potable water, and that's one of the reasons why we got involved in politics too. And so the idea that a kid that grew up in a mobile home park that doesn't have potable water, and it was until like about 3 years ago that it got its first park, and that where it was a practice, a norm, where in middle school and high school we were working the fields every summer. The idea that those students can go to college or go to a workforce, a CT program, and then join the labor union, but through education, you create these opportunities. Now you could jump a few economic ladders. Now you're in a different tax bracket, and that's through education that we have these these opportunities to be able to create a community that moves forward, that progresses, and that we bring everyone together. Those are, I mean, I'm sure I look back at my notes and say, like, a few other points, but thinking about the individual, the community, the cultural awareness, and the socioeconomic mobility is very important.
Thank you so much. I think you deliver a very powerful message about inclusivity and understanding different points of view and different cultural backgrounds and how that ties directly into education. And thank you again for your time today. We're really honored to have you on the Policy Chess podcast. So going back to how powerful education is and the impact that it has on these communities and how it advocates for social mobility as well as inclusivity and understanding amongst different peoples. But as you served your time in the realm of public policy, what are some of the policy reforms within the education system that you kind of can see that maybe you think aren't really addressing those things of social mobility or perhaps inclusivity or,
Well, I think for education looks the same, classrooms look very similar as they did decades ago. And I know we're gonna get talking about the advancement of technology, but those that's gonna be very important. Adapting to the new AI world, the new technologies that exist, and how we can use those tools to empower communities. But in terms of educational reform, that I think are very important. Now I'm a parent. I have 3 kids, and but even before that, I mentioned I started in education through Head Start. And Head Start has these very strict federal poverty guidelines that we follow for families to have access to. In California, the federal poverty guideline is extreme poverty. Because we have a minimum wage in the federal level of $7.25 around, and in California that's not true, and it's $15.50. So when we look at federal poverty guidelines to address federal programs implemented in California. Sometimes we have poor communities that aren't too poor to access some services. There are other state programs and that address the state preschools that create opportunities. And for a long time we hadn't seen an advancement of early childhood education, but our current governor and our current legislature we've seen an investment in universal TK. Which is expanding for 4-year-olds. We see it as an opportunity for adding that extra grade in the K-12 world. I have TK-12 and ensuring that all 4 years are taken care of. Right now, there's advancement on some of the cutoff dates that existed in the TK program, but eventually all 4-year-olds will be able to qualify for TK. And then looking at state preschools and these federal schools and other nonprofits that address also early child education and childcare, looking at our 0 to 3-year-olds. How can we now ensure that every 3-year-old, also goes to preschool? And so those ideas that 5 years ago or even more recent, we couldn't even think about it being pragmatic, but I think we could see it today in a world where things seem so far. But I also think as a rural community, I grew up in very rural areas. When these things are implemented, we also look at populations and where people live. And so when you live in dense areas, you have more access to different types of programs because of all, obviously not saying that's all, amazing and perfect, but there is more opportunities because, just so many people people are competing, then organizations or schools are competing each other versus in rural California, like in the Coachella Valley, East Coachella Valley, or in the central San Joaquin Valley. You don't have, like the competition of multiple public schools, charter schools, and then other private schools and nonprofits looking, there is existing, but you don't have it as extreme as you have it in the dense areas like LA or San Francisco. And so now how can we attract more programs to compete and to create more opportunities for these rural communities is very important. I think the state legislature has done a good job in addressing some of these things, but we could do, obviously move forward and expand from those type of things. In terms of K-12, I talked about we're ethnic studies, and that's very important. I see that Governor Newsom is also addressing a lot of the is issues that needed to be addressed with the Local Control Accountability Plan, the LCAP, that was introduced by Governor Brown. And that's for having the local control and ensuring that we can look at student achievement as well, and how can we ensure that we close the opportunity gap for these communities while we're addressing the funding of these schools. And then in higher education, we see so many issues from community college not being accessible to certain areas, or too far where people have to drive, and then there's not enough public transportation, like is the case in the desert, or we see the year after year tuition increase, it says, being proposed, and how does that create, what kind of issues does it create for our communities, our working class communities, but also our middle class families, that some of the middle class families don't have all this access to the financial aid, but they're also not super rich to be able to afford these 12,000 plus tuition rates plus housing that could be equal to that here in California.
Yeah, you talk a lot about opportunity gaps and trying to bridge those gaps, which is very important. Would you say that the starting of bridging of those gaps starts in nonprofits and non-governmental organizations, or it's the government identifying a public problem and then from that nonprofits start to form to address the issue?
I think it's the government's responsibility to, I believe that it is the government's responsibility to address these issues. There are nonprofits that are available and exist. So one way that government sometimes execute these programs is by having nonprofits apply for these grants, and then they do the on-ground work, that because some of these nonprofits have the relationship with communities, versus sometimes when government officials come to communities that they're not from, maybe they don't, sometimes communities not as trustworthy of them. So I think there's opportunity to build partnerships with government and non-government agencies. At the end of the day, I do think that education it falls in the responsibility of the government, and not of the nonprofit. I think the nonprofit could be the tool to enact these services in partnership with the government.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to describe it, is the nonprofit is the tool that has the connections with the community to make a more broad policy have a more personal effect. Kind of building off of that, in terms of reforms that need to be made in education, what are some reforms that are currently in progress that hold promise?
Yeah, I think I talked a lot about the early childhood education. I saw that, I see that being addressed in the last few legislative sessions. And someone that's a parent and as a council member, Mayor Pro Tem in our city, we know that access to childcare and for the young kids is tough, and so we've seen also an expansion of part-time centers to full-day preschools. So that those hold great promises. I think this year too I was following other legislation around ensuring that we have more funding for dual enrollment for high school students to be enrolled in college courses, and so by the time they get here, we see a better students have college credits. With the funding formulas, I think they're people are looking at different opportunities to fund schools that doesn't just rely in average daily attendance. And so, and then also the ideas of other stuff like discipline, and how we discipline schools. I see some legislation targeting removing, suspension and expulsions for defined students, and so those things are interesting debates that happen, and as long as when we're pushing policy in our state, that the conversation is always student-centered. In the local level, in the city, we've get a chance to work with our school district, and get a chance to, we just not long ago, but we haven't fully implemented it, we voted to create our youth council in the city too, to engage more students. So at the end of the day, I'm about to turn 30, still young, I think, but it takes a lot of the, when I was in high school, or when I was in K-12, or when I was in college, the needs were very different. So it's important for us to learn from current high school students, from current college students, about the needs that exist today, and seeing how we can tackle those.
Yeah, Thank you so much again for your response, and very young by my count as well. So.
Thank you.
And you did a great job of elaborating for us some of the local and then also the statewide different reforms in education. But is there more of an impact in making important decisions in regards to education in one or two of these areas of policy? Do you think it is more specifically focused at the local level or at the statewide level or perhaps even the national level?
Yeah, well, I think we need to have a partnership and working. We all work, all these different, local, state, and local, regional, state, and federal government work together to implement programs. The federal government makes sure we provide, federal and state, provides a lot of funding. The state sets a lot of the standards, and then in the local level, we do implement a lot of the work with local perspective, and the local control funding formula does a good job in including local families in the decision making. And I'm very, as a council member and a former board member, very supportive of the idea of local involvement. I am not supportive of local involvement when it means, I'm supportive of local involvement, but I'm not supportive of communities that want to use that to discriminate against people. So saying like that the state, for instance, big conversation today is around the banning of books, and so some school districts feel that they have the authority to ban books or ban certain curricula that fosters empowerment in within their youth. They see these types of educations as wrong, but we can look at and they use that local control as saying, we voted for these school board members and we have all decision. I think that's sort of where it draws sort of a gray area for people that are very, very supportive of local control, but local control, but hate doesn't trump, it shouldn't, included in the idea of local control. At that point, we do need to make sure that state standards are followed, and that the state needs to intervene when things like that do happen. And so I think it needs to be balanced. Not one agency has control power over the other. There is a relationship. There's the funding and the standards and the implementation of it, but we need to work in partnership. We can't work in silos, or else the people that are going to have the service is going to be the students, because our local government has a different idea than the state, and so does that of the federal government. I think we all need to work in together, because at the end of the day, the party politics, that doesn't matter when you're a 3-year-old, trying to get into preschool, or you're a 10-year-old in elementary school, or 12-year-old in middle school, or 15-year-old in high school. These party politics of that are so divisive, they don't matter to these kids. And we need to bring back the conversation centered around the children, not about these sort of party politics that we're bringing into our school districts.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand completely. Thank you for that response. It is very detailed, and it explains a lot about the different levels of policy and how each area of public policy actually goes into the state, local, and regional level.
Yeah, so kind of shifting gears now, and I know you kind of hinted at it earlier, but to look into the future, what implications does the seemingly constant evolution of technology, as you're saying with AI, and I feel like every day there's something new that's coming out that's changing the way we learn. What implications does that have on education, and how can we adapt ourselves and our education system to best support the needs of this changing world and now changing youth?
Yeah, I'm not an expert, so it's just my opinions or how I view this. AI, and at first I was like, what is this? And I was seeing images on social media, people creating images with AI, and it's like I didn't understand it. And I made an account on ChatGPT and I started using it. And it's I think obviously it's a great tool that it's going to exist. It's going to be there, and so how do we embrace it is, I think, the conversation that some professionals are having. I'm of the opinion that we need to find a way that we use it in our daily lives, and we use it at work and education, obviously not to plagiarize, and so I know the educational professionals are looking at those specific, how students using AI for work aside for educational assignments. I think those are a different debate. But we can't be afraid of it or shut it down because we don't understand it. I think that AI wasn't a thing years ago. I even when Grammarly came around, I was in college and I didn't have Grammarly, and then I started working and I discovered Grammarly and I connected to my email and it corrects my grammar all the time. And so that idea too, that seemed so new to me and so different. And I was even scared of oh man, it's not me talking, but it is. You just adjust. So now using AI is now how do you embrace that too into your daily lives, into education, into the workforce. How do we empower individuals to seek careers in that field, in tech industry? I'm speaking here as a council member, and I want to make sure that I say that because I wear the other hat at work, and my opinions that I share are of me as a council member. But at our COE they have a department of educational technology now, and they have embraced esports. They have tournaments for high school students and scholarships for esports is a growing phenomenon. People are watching it. People are watching people play video games, and someone that hasn't played video games since Nintendo 64 was around. I didn't understand it, but I know it's real, and people are embracing it. And so, how do we now continue embracing these different technologies? And I think it'll just be a better way once we learn how to properly implement it and not be so scared of it. Because people would worry that using it thinking of it as a negative connotation. I think we need to look at it as a positive way and seeing how we can ensure that whether we have career tech fields into ed technology, into these new forms of technologies, and there are some in Desert Sands. There's IT programs in other school districts in the county of Riverside. There's many different IT career tech through the career technical education programs that empower students to learn how to obtain these skills to be part of this modernized world. I think it's a great it's scary. It can be scary, but if we embrace it and we learn about it, we're not scared about it.
Yeah. And embracing it's such a unique aspect of education that you have to set policies in place, but also be prepared for the ever-changing world. And so kind of going off of that, would you say that as policy takes a long time to change and now technology is taking a lot shorter of a time to change as time goes on, would you say that our education system is prepared for the fast changes that are coming and to adapt to the changing needs, or would you say it's something that needs to be worked on for the future?
I'm an optimistic person. So I want to say that we have the best people in these universities, and obviously there's some things that again we don't understand because, as you mentioned, things are ever changing, and so people are I think we have people that are adaptable and can assimilate to the changing world, and I think we trust our diverse community here to help the educational professionals adjust to it. I know that, for instance, COVID-19 was such a troubling time for all of us across the world, and the idea of for high schools or K-12 schools, so from 1 week to another to go online, we thought about it, prior to 2020, that probably wasn't something we could do. People thought there's no way we could do this, with the lack of infrastructure, of internet, the lack of devices, and somehow communities, the counties, the county office of eds, the school districts, local leaders, nonprofits, everyone partnering together to ensure that happened, and it was done. I think that if we're met again with an emergency to meet these things, I think that we're going to see that unity again, and we'll meet them. But I think if we've seen gradual change. I believe that as an optimistic person that we have the right folks in the positions to make these changes, and if not, then we need to make sure that they are in these places.
Thank you, Mayor Galarza. I couldn't agree more that I think it's hard to say that with these new incoming technologies that they are going anywhere. And so I think the approach should be towards adaptability and supporting them and trying to benefit that into our own infrastructure.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I just wanted to shift gears here. So a lot of our podcast listeners are predominantly university students, ranging between the ages of 18 and 22. So I just wanted to ask you if there was any other ways that students like myself or my colleague Rachel might be able to get involved in local government, or perhaps any career or internship opportunities that we should be looking at post-graduation.
Yeah. Hey, before I get to this, I have like thoughts about the last question, and then I'll go to this. I just not long ago I read a book, Robert Iger, who's the CEO of Disney, and in the book, he I think the title's Adventure of a Lifetime, something like that, a journey of a lifetime. So, and so in the book, he talks about when he became CEO, there's all these different challenges with Apple, with Pixel. And these were at one point like competitors, and so I thought, I think about the idea of pixels. I think the former Bob Iger was very progressive in the way he thought, and or is very progressive in the way he thinks, and so Pixar had sort of a advance and was a lot more progressive in terms of the technology than Disney was in animation. And Disney at one point was, sort of the GOAT on that, right? And now you had Pixar who had former employees of Disney now creating better movies that are, better technology, and former CEOs were sort of saw that as a competition and didn't embrace it. They didn't embrace it, and they were losing to Pixar. The movies that Disney was releasing were not getting as many sales, theater views as the movies Pixar was releasing. And so when Robert Iger became CEO, instead of keeping that idea of we don't understand it, so there are enemies, we're not going to embrace them. He embraced it. He worked with Apple and eventually bought Pixar and hired everyone there, and the way he did it, he when he bought up Pixar, he told the leads there, you don't need to adjust to the Disney way. We want the Pixar way to teach us. And so I think that's sort of I think about that story and how Bob Iger was now you have Disney Pixar, and you have all these great movies like WALL-E that came out, and these new Elemental, and a lot of a lot of different movies that have Disney Pixar, and very successful movies that have a combination of both, because of that idea versus who could think of a world where Disney and Pixar aren't sort of together today. And so I'm glad I read that, because now when I see a challenge that makes me uncomfortable, instead of seeing it just something like I'm gonna ignore, I learned through that story that we need to embrace it. And sometimes it's uncomfortable that there's other people that know more than we do, or other technologies. But if we embrace it and we learn from them, then we're gonna be able to create a greater community, a better us. So I wanted to share that, because I just thought about that anecdote as you were talking. But
no, thank you for sharing them. I think it's a great lesson, not only in policy but also in life. So,
It's embrace change. Mm-hmm. Back to the internships. As a council member in Coachella, there's been internships. There was already paid internships in the city, but we sort of embraced it and grew it too. In Coachella, we have now we partnered with One Future Coachella Valley. They're a very good educational organization. They focus on college and career readiness in the desert Coachella Valley areas. Work with all the 3 school districts there, and the community college, and all the different higher education institution. And even One Future, they started as a committee under another organization, and they were called Pathways to Careers, and now it's called One Future, and they're a bigger entity. They outgrew the organization that they were once part of, and we partnered with them. And now what we're doing is we have paid interns at the City of Coachella every summer, students like us that go back home. And before, when I was in college, when I'd go back home, I would work at Del Taco. I a guitar string company where we did a lot of packing and coiling guitars. I worked at a Chinese restaurant, and I'm very thankful for these experiences. But had I had an opportunity to intern in the city and for the summer, and it being an educational opportunity that also pays me, that I can save some money to come back to college, and I'm not broke, and so that idea sort of I thought about it, and so I worked with another council member, Stephanie Virkin, to bring up this proposal to our city, and we were able to fund these now summer interns in the City of Coachella, and so in partnership with One Future Coachella Valley. So big shout out to them to being partners, and health career pathways that they've been using for a while, and so those are it's a growing thing. When I was in college, I was I mentioned I was an intern in Head Start at RCOE. At the time, there was no paid internship, so I was an unpaid intern. But I'm glad I did it. I knew I had to take that sacrifice and make myself uncomfortable to learn more about the different career opportunities. But it wasn't a popular thing to have paid internships. Now it is. And then mentioning in my day job, I mentioned I work at the County Office of Education, and through there we have paid internship programs for college students throughout the county of Riverside, and now Imperial County, because they have a Migrant Head Start is part of Imperial County Migrant Head Start is also part of RCOE. We have 20 positions of paid interns throughout the year. So we have two cohorts, one in the school year from September to end of May. So that's one cohort of students that when you're in college, so you're in our Riverside or local school, you could be an intern with us here in downtown, or you're in the desert and you're a college or desert student, or going to Cal State San Bernardino out in the desert, then you could intern with us in Indio. In Murrieta, we also have offices there where students that are in San Marcos State or community colleges down there, they can also intern with us. In Imperial County, there's a lot of different, there's Imperial Valley College, San Diego State, and so now we have paid internship programs for students. So that's one cohort, and then we also use that summer program idea, and the idea for it is we do understand that during the school year we don't discriminate against anyone. A lot of our interns during the school year are students that are here for school. Not all of them necessarily live here throughout the year, and so sometimes they go back home for the summer. And then we have all these other students that are from Riverside County schools that go to UCLA, go to UCSB, other schools out of the area, but they come back home, and now we have summer internship for them to be here and working on educational issues and education for our students listening. To the idea of working in a school district is not only for teachers. You have fiscal departments, you have technology, ITs, you have different mental health, social, emotional learning, all these different programs that exist within an educational institution that isn't just the idea of like teacher or principal. There's various opportunities that exist in educational institutions. So I really encourage people to look into those, look into municipalities. And if your city hasn't taken on a paid internship in the summer, it'd be great to approach your local council member and say, hey, at the City of Coachella, they're doing this, and why not here, right? More than happy to advocate. I think that this approach of having paid interns, and paid interns should not be a replacement of other employees. It should be an educational learning opportunity for both. It's an enrichment opportunity for both the municipality and the student. And so, if your city doesn't have a summer paid internship program, you should advocate for one to exist, and ensuring that they can use some of their savings or some of the general funds, or looking at state grants. That I know that our state legislature too, our former speaker Randon has talked about paid internship programs and started paid internship programs in Sacramento. I also did UC Center in Sacramento when I was in college, and I learned a lot when I was there. And the assembly member I worked for, Rodolfo Garcia, took really good care of me, and I learned a lot. But when through the UC Center program, there wasn't an opportunity to get paid, and so I was doing it for free while also going to college. And so those those things are changing though. I graduated in 2016. It's not long ago, but thinking about it now, 7-8 years later, we're seeing a lot of paid internship opportunities come up, and they're valuing the labor and creating these educational opportunities for the students, because we know that these students are going to be the next generation that are going to be in these jobs. And if you know, and I mentioned it's very important to have paid internships too that institutions need to get because those students that can take advantage of unpaid internships are probably students that you know don't have the need in terms of social economic issues at home. I had to take loans to do these internships, and I'm paying them off now. I'm grateful that things have worked out for me, but it was it was a gamble that I took on myself and the organizations that I wanted to intern for. When we have a paid internship program, we can ensure that a college student isn't working at a fast food restaurant, going to school full time, and then looking for for unpaid internship program. Why not ensure that they just go to school full time and then have a paid internship program without having to look for other ways of making money. They could be learning while making money should be an idea, and I know that we have different opportunities also on paid jobs here on campus, and so continuing to enrich those. Hopefully, the university is embracing and creating more jobs for students. I was an employee here when I was a student. I mentioned I also worked for UCR Extension. I worked at the Hub for a while as dining services. But a lot of times when I worked here, when I worked here, I also had other jobs. I worked at a local library in Home Gardens as well, and then mentioned the different fast food and restaurants that we worked on. And I'm glad I did them, but I wish I didn't have to do it. I learned a lot in terms of like work ethic and time management. But I think I could have learned that without having to put myself in positions where my social life was impacted, or or I was behind on schoolwork because I had to go to work, and sometimes we would lose that idea of like, oh, I need to go make money to pay rent, but I'm here to go to school, and so yeah, those are just different thinking out loud. But I look for paid internships in the field that you want to work for. I don't shy away from emailing people. Say you go to the website and they don't have an internship, email them, and they might create something. I mentioned my experience when I was in college. I went through the RCOA website and I didn't see a college internship opportunity, so I emailed them directly, and then they found a spot for me. And fast forward, now I'm an employee there, right? And so it's take risks, and at the end of the day, like the worst case scenario is you're in the same place that you are right now, and that's not a bad place. You're on your way to graduate from college.
Yeah, something that you've mentioned throughout the conversation we've had today is amid diversity, whether of background or diversity of need, what really is important is unity through change and unity despite change.
Yeah.
And whether it's unity of each other to grow together and, handle that change together, or unity of even looking into government, of the different branches of government and the different levels of government to help create effective change that works for everyone. And I think that represents exactly what education needs, is a good foundation in unity and bringing communities together, and a good foundation that adapts to the changing world and everything around us. And so with that, it has been such an honor to get to speak with you, and we are so grateful to have you here today, and thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.